Hello, everybody, and welcome to our live stream. Only one day's notice for this one, so I hope you're able to catch it when we put out the reference to it last night. Welcome. It's the Thursday after China. It's about 10 days before the Japanese Grand Prix, whichever way you want to look at it. And lots happened in the first two races, of course, so lots to talk about there. Amazing events in China. I say events, I was about to say amazing race in China. I guess it was an amazing race. I've got to confess that it was a good race. But it was a good race because of the infighting between George and Kimi at Mercedes and between Lewis and Charles at Ferrari. And that was good, obviously. Good also to see Ferrari doing well. And closing the gap maybe a little bit on some circuits to Mercedes, although Mercedes obviously still have a lot of development leeway in which to work. And then beyond that, yeah, some encouraging performance. Good to see Alpine going quite well with Pierre Gasly. That was excellent. But, big problems at Red Bull. The Ford Red Bull powertrain alliance, not too bad. It's going quite well as predicted, but how good is that car going to be, or how good can it be over the next few months? And then, of course, there's the Aston Martin Honda saga. No doubt there'll be lots of chat about that today on the live stream. The good news for those teams that are struggling is that we do have, after Japan, we have this break now, effectively a month break, which is unheard of really in modern Formula One, to have mid-season, once you've done a couple of races, learned a few lessons, then to have basically three to 4 weeks of thinking about the car, developing the car back at the factory. So that's quite a big thing for them, obviously. With the postponement, cancellation, we'll see, of the Saudi and Bahrain Grand Prix. Anyway, we will have a look now at some of your questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. As I mentioned in the community last night, a big event for us this weekend is going to be the La Nucia Rally, not too far north of where we are in Spain, and really looking forward to that. It's going to be great just to get back and see cars with all four wheels in the air and sliding, handbrake turns, incredible car control. There's high standard of driving in this rally. It's a tarmac event. Not my favorite rally. I much prefer gravel, I have to say, but not many gravel rallies in Spain. We saw one last week actually in Lorca nearby, but very good that was too. But tarmac this weekend, and it's a good entry. A lot of Rally 2 cars there, very quick Rally 2 cars, and decent drivers as well. So looking forward to that. But anyway, with no more ado, let's get on to the questions. And this show now belongs to you guys. This is from Alex Rimmel. Thank you, Alex. Hi, Peter. If there was a breakaway series which set the regs the same as, say, 1988 and allowed teams to design a car with modern tech, would it be good to watch? Well, I mean, the bottom line is anything is good to watch if you enjoy Formula One. And of course, there are many different ways of enjoying Formula One. You can enjoy it as an engineering orientated fan who loves specific engineering areas, or maybe just the engineering in general. You can love it because of the drivers and the personalities and the glamour and the glory. You can love it because of the art of driving, which I guess is part of my DNA. You can love it from afar if you're watching a million other things, but Formula One happens to come on screen and there's a great start shot or a great overtake, you'll think, isn't this wonderful? And so on. There are so many different perspectives of Formula One. So it kind of depends on what your view is. But I would say this, in an era where Formula One is owned by the commercial rights, that is, are owned by Liberty Media, basically Liberty Media should be able to make anything work, because all they're doing is turning whatever Formula One is into a show, and that means great television and great movies and all the things that they do very well at Liberty. So to my mind, all of the things we're doing and constantly talking about, more overtaking, should we be going to electrification even more, is 50% enough, blah, blah, all those things are kind of irrelevant, because whatever Formula One was, Liberty should be able to make it into a really watchable, entertaining show. And so, yes, as I've said several times now, if a lot of you viewers out there, and some of my buddies, we had been designated the job of coming up with a new formula for 2026, and we'd gone in a completely different direction to Formula One's chosen route, and we went back to fully normally aspirated engines, for example, or maybe turbo engines, no, let's say internal combustion engines, no electricity, and we'd had much less downforce even than we have today. And we had narrower tires perhaps than we have today. Maybe not the tires, leave the tires more or less as they are. But we went to other things like alternative fuel, even more down that path of alternative fuels. And we went back to active ride, and we had skirts maybe on the car to make it much easier to follow another car. And we did all those things. And we obviously limited top speeds because we don't want the cars to get too far out of sync with the design of the circuits, but limit them to a proper top speed, 330 or whatever. Then would Formula One, as packaged by Liberty with all the stuff that they have at their disposal, would it be any less enjoyable than it is today? I very much doubt it. And my other point, regardless of the regulations we have, okay, 50%, maybe it's 55, 45, I don't know, whatever it is right now, and the way we have all this power limiting stuff going on around the lap in order to regenerate the energy. If Liberty went down the path that I've been talking about for at least the last 10 years, if not, and more so over the last 5 years, of opening up the Formula One show right down to the lowest basement level, right up to the top to the drivers, and capturing the entire circus from top to bottom and doing lots of reality TV around that, then it would be an even bigger show. I have no doubt about that. And just starting at the top, I still don't understand why we don't have access to the team debriefs or briefs before the race, why we don't have access to the driver's briefing, why all that isn't put out on TV. All you need to do is put it in the Concord Agreement. If you don't like it, don't join the club. At the top level, at the bottom level, the sponsorship industry, the catering industry, the logistics industry, the factory staff, and the hours they keep, and what it's like being a machinist on the shop floor in any Formula One factory. All the engineers involved, the wind tunnel, the CFD, the design of the suspension, the design of the monocoque, the chassis. All of these things have their own storylines, and they're all brilliant storylines if brought to life correctly. And nobody in the world on the planet Earth probably has more scope to be able to do that than Liberty Media. But they're just scratching the surface of it. And most of it's fairly contrived stuff at the moment. And I just don't understand why they're not doing that. I really don't. To me, regardless of what category of racing you want to describe Formula One as being, in terms of whether it's technology, whether it's electric, whether it's this, whether it's that, if you package it with all these wonderful things, it'll be watchable and it'll be great, regardless of what goes on the track. So yeah, that's my answer. Quite a long-winded answer, obviously, but equally, I just, it has to be said. I don't understand why they're not doing more of this. Martin Lee, it was just some hearts there. Thank you very much indeed. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Very nice of you to do that. We'll try and limit the questions, but there's a second one here from Alex Rimmel. Or would the teams be able to come up with cars more or less identical to each other and neutralize racing with improved reliability? Well, it kind of just, that's an extension of your first question, obviously. And as I say, it doesn't really matter. If you package everything correctly and you've got access to all of the great parts of the Formula One package from top to bottom, the whole iceberg, then questions like, is it close racing? Is it not? They're all irrelevant because it's the Formula One story as a whole that is the magic, in my opinion. And you may say, oh, well, a lot of people, I suppose an argument against that would be, well, a lot of people just sort of surf and come in and they just want to see lots of overtakes and they want to get out of Formula One having watched their overtakes. Well, if there was a storyline between the races going on, a really compelling reality TV show around all these aspects of the Formula One iceberg that I've been talking about, then does it matter? Because there's your ratings anyway. Anyway, there you go. And when I say ratings, of course, there's a huge production around each Grand Prix and the rights holders pay a fortune to be a part of that. But why not expand that production between the races as well, into the factories, into the people, and at the race meeting expand it too? all doable and not massively expensive to do. In fact, you could go out and sell new rights. You could sell the between race rights to the digital industry, to the whole internet industry, and they could cover all that. And wow, wouldn't it be brilliant? Wouldn't it be brilliant if right now we could be, okay, 10 o'clock is the board meeting at Aston Martin where Adrian Newey is talking to Lawrence Stroll. Isn't that fabulous? Go and watch that for half an hour. And then we're going over to McLaren to see the post-mortem on what happened there. We're going down to the electrical division of the race team to see what happened there with all the electrics and what exactly was the cause. And then we're going to go over to Ferrari to see, we're going to join the Ferrari team for lunch at the Cavallino, and we're going to see the mechanics celebrating what was the best race they've had for a long time. You know, if that was going on all the time, wouldn't it be brilliant? I think it would. It's easy to do. I don't know why they don't do it. And it's secret. They'd never allow that in. Well, yeah, but I mean, look at the way, I hate to say it, but look at the way Trump does those cabinet meetings where, of course, they don't say anything substantial because they wouldn't in front of the cameras. But nonetheless, it's there. And you can obviously mix and match what you're going to say. And if you know that's one of the things you're going to have to do every 2 months, you're going to have to do 20 minutes of a board meeting. It's easy to rig it up. If a producer or a director can't make that happen without treading on the toes of any of the teams and giving away any secrets, and at the same time making it compelling television, then they shouldn't be a director or a producer. It's very easy to do. Anyway, point made, I hope. Ronnie Way, another of our regulars. Thank you, Ronnie. Hi, Peter. With 2 races cancelled, do you think it would allow some teams like Red Bull to fine-tune their battery engine? Looks to be a Mercedes-Ferrari era. I'm afraid. Big thanks to your chats. Oh, well, I mean, you put that I'm afraid in there, not I, but I know what you mean. It's interesting, isn't it? There doesn't seem to be as much. What is it? It's chutzpah, I think is the word, isn't it? When Mercedes are winning races, as when Red Bull are winning races with Max, or Ferrari are winning races. What is it? What is it Mercedes don't have? It's interesting point to ask Toto Wolff. Well, I obviously have my ideas there. They're just a bit more boring, aren't they? But, everything's grey and silver and too organised. And that's why Sterling Moss, I think, he loved driving for Merck. But I think he also liked driving his privately entered 250F or his Rob Walker Cooper, because it's real life then, isn't it? And Mercedes, they're in danger of becoming the steamroller that they used to be and have been, of course, in recent times with Lewis. And to some extent Nico and Valtteri a little bit. Anyway, of course, it's a big thing for them. Aston and McLaren and Red Bull right now, I'll be thinking, pretty pleased about this. I say McLaren only because they're not exactly where they want to be performance-wise with the chassis, and on top of that, they just had that double whammy electrical failure in China. Obviously, they'll be trying to get that right for Japan, but equally, does that show up some sort of installation issue that Mercedes haven't encountered? Maybe not, bearing in mind George also had an electrical problem in Q3 in China. But anyway, all these little wrinkles, again, we don't really know because we're not given a good enough, there's not a good enough job being done from a television perspective. Refer to my early comments. But this is a big breath of fresh air for anybody struggling right now. And probably a bit annoying, I would imagine, for Mercedes if they've got this, up until June, they've got the use of the compression ratio trick they've got, and that's taken 2 races out of that time. I wonder if they're going to say, oh, well, because of that, let's make it July now. Probably not, I would think. Andrew Compton, thank you very much, Andrew. Welcome as a member of the channel. For those that, and also to David Ballon, thank you very much indeed, guys. The becoming members, something we've just started, and I'd like to thank everybody who's decided to subscribe. Really appreciate it, and going to do my best to give you additional content and lots of backstage access to stuff we're doing as the year progresses, and interviews. He got one out now with Nirei Fukuzumi, which I did yesterday, and it was just a personal whim, really. I always remember watching Fukuzumi in GP3 when he was teammate to George Russell and Jack Aitken, and how good he was. You know, it's not easy when you come over. You don't speak a word of English, and you come over. You're backed by Honda, and he came over and he got this drive, and he won 2 races. You know, he did pretty well, and he earned the respect of George, Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc, all the boys at the time, and Charles was in F2, and he's retained those friendships, which shows how much respect they have for him ever since. And we chatted a lot about that, and about having to go back to Japan. Didn't have a great F2 season after his F3, after GP3. He was with Arden when, I think the eye was off the ball by then at Arden with the Horners. But he went back to Japan, did well, and now here he is. Was he 29 now, I think? And he's just headed the test times at Suzuka for Super Formula, which is the second quickest, proper road racing single-seater championship in the world after Formula One. Yokohama tires, 550, 600 horsepower, 4-cylinder turbos, beautiful Dallara chassis. Great category. And he was quickest in testing, and he'll, in theory, probably win a race or 2 this year, I would imagine. And I was chatting to him about, now he's with Toyota, he's in Toyota engines, and his relationship with, with the whole Toyota Motorsport program. And obviously there's a huge canvas out there for a driver like Fukuzumi, whether it be to WEC, whether it be to maybe back in the direction of Europe, and maybe even in direction of Formula One. I mean, given the Toyota tie-up with Haas Ferrari, I suggested that to him. In fact, I suggested to him quite lightheartedly that he should get his mate George Russell to help with that one, in the same way that George no doubt helped get Alex the Williams drive a few years ago. So, yeah, and he had a good chuckle about that. And a lovely guy. And his dad is a high priest, Buddhist high priest. And we last time I spoke to Nirei, it was 2018, I guess. And I was talking to him about that. And he said, "Oh yeah." And I said, "Does your dad come to races?" Thinking of him in robes and stuff. And he said, "Oh yeah, he comes to races, but I never know when he's coming to races. He never tells me. And I never see him anyway, because he goes to the grandstand and watches me race." And he said, yeah, he still did that last year. Isn't that brilliant? I love that. All racing dads take note. Very, very good. Anyway, I'll put that out as a members video, because obviously it's a fairly small catchment area, but beyond that, it was a sort of intimate discussion that I think we'll try and do more of. Anyway, getting back to the point, if you haven't subscribed as a member and like to, obviously no compunction whatsoever, but if you'd like to, it's pretty easy. You just find the share, share tag, I think, next to subscribe below our videos, and yeah, there you go. Anyway, thanks for everybody who's done that. So really appreciate it. And we'll continue to work hard, do the best job we can. Sarash, another of our regulars. Hey, Sarash, thank you so much for being a part of this. One of our members as well. Peter, Russell drives like Senna. I feel that Antonelli drives like Prost. Good combination of long and short corner drivers with reduced entry speeds. Do you think a short corner driver can make a difference? Well, I think that's in reference to these regulations, isn't it, that question? And around China, to be honest, I don't think a short driver... Let's talk about, again, let's just remind everybody what we mean by a short corner driver. We don't necessarily mean a driver who has a sort of innate eye for wanting to get into the corner a little bit earlier than a driver who doesn't have that innate eye, who instead wants to have a sort of geometrical classic line of hitting an apex, which is actually the bisection of the angle created by extending the 2 straights, if you see what I mean. If it's a 90-degree corner, the apex is the bisection of that, and that's the clipping point in the classic racing driver school. But if you're a short, if you think you've got an eye for getting in early, that's great. But the problem is that it's not just line. It's all about your ability to manipulate the car in perfect harmony with all the dynamic weights that the car is being subjected to when you take it out of a straight line. The minute you load up the car laterally, there are dynamic weights moving through the car, and they will increase, decrease. Then you're mixing them with retardation, with negative, positive G, and all those weights are flying around, and it's a question of balancing those in perfect harmony. And some drivers tend to separate all of that as much as possible. They brake in a straight line, they start to load up the car, they feel the load on the rear, and then they're very confident of what they can do with the rear and they can do with the throttle and balance the car, and they're just going through the corner at the maximum speed, maybe with slide oversteer, slide understeer, and that's how they do it. Other drivers can multitask, and those are the very rare great drivers. They can multitask, braking against lateral load, against retardation, against acceleration, all of these dynamic weights in the air. And don't underestimate the importance of the word dynamic, because these forces are changing all the time. Every millisecond, everything is moving, and they're balancing them all. And they're balancing it all through incredible sensitivity, suppleness, feel for what the car is going to do next. And they generate that feel for what the car is going to do next by the suppleness of what they're doing. Sorry about this. And so, sorry, slightly distracted by that call. Somebody who should have known that I was live at the moment and didn't. My manager. So yeah, it's that suppleness and that feel. So does a driver who has, I mean, let's say Kimi Antonelli has that feel. He definitely has that ability, I think, to manage all those dynamic weights in a pretty harmonious way. Not at the level of Max Verstappen, I don't believe. And I say that because I haven't really seen Kimi doing that on medium high-speed corners to the level of, say, a Max Verstappen or even a Charles Leclerc. But he definitely looks pretty good. He looks Isaac Hadjar good on slow corners and slow change of direction as well. Whereas George is a little bit more, I know what I can do here. I can multitask, but I don't want to go down that road too far, because I'm so good at just balancing the car right on the edge when I need to, and braking as late as I can without braking too late. And as you correctly say, much as this, that was a sort of Ayrton Senna philosophy, just do everything on the absolute edge of perfection in a classic way. Hard to beat that if it's done perfectly. And that's why Ayrton Senna was very hard to beat, because he was almost perfect in every respect, apart from his throttle response, or throttle usage is probably a better word. But guys like Jim Clark, guys like Max Verstappen, guys like Nigel Mansell are guys that don't think too much about what they're doing. They let everything happen in a very natural way, and the surface of the road tells them what to do next. Kimi Räikkönen at his very best. And so, yeah, the question is that advantage that they have, that suppleness, that ability to multitask at that level, going to still show through in these cars? Well, getting around to the point, around Shanghai, I don't think it did show through very much. I think Lewis, as I said, was excellent through turn 16, the last left-hander, on entry to that corner. Truly excellent. But that isn't so much multitasking. It was just getting a feel for the front and using it really well. And perhaps in a way that Charles wasn't there. Charles looked a little bit clumsy through there, I thought. But I don't think we should read any more into that than what it was. It was just Lewis really good into that corner, and not an easy corner either. And so where else? Normally I would say turn 7 would have been a good place to see what drivers can really do. But turn 7 was completely nullified by the engine power just sort of dropping off mid-corner for everybody. So that suddenly became a non-event of a corner for me. And I can't really think of anywhere else. You know, going in, if you turn 7, 8, 9, is it that turn 10, the left-hander at the end of the back straight there? Not really. It's pretty line locked. I mean, that's the problem with Shanghai. Problem with a lot of the circuits, the modern circuits, is it's pretty line locked. You know, it's pretty clear what you got to do. Like going into turn 1, it's pretty clear. You can get in pretty early there. You know, it's a tightening radius corner. There's quite a lot of grip on the inside, and you just go for it. And you know, Liam Lawson looks about the same as Isaac Hadjar through there, into there. So it's a bit early to I mean, my hope is that we'll get to Suzuka and we still will see some corners where a guy like a Max can make a difference. Or maybe, Charles will have an advantage over Lewis again. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think turn one will be anything like the corner it was and has been all these years, because I imagine they're going to be super clipping going into one, and and the power's going to be coming down as it did in the middle of turn 7. If it isn't, and they're flat out into one, and it's a question of can you get through the first part flat, and then you've got to be incredibly delicate to get the car turned in beautifully for the second part of one, and slightly early turn in to make sure you don't use too much road coming out, so you're perfectly set up for the next left-hander. All those things, I don't imagine it's going to be very demanding there. And my fear is that the two Degnas are going to become watered down as well because of the entry speed. Now, a lot of people might say that I'm wrong in one respect, in that if they're still having to brake slightly before a corner, surely the corner then is exactly the same speed and generating exactly the same lateral load as it did before. Well, in theory, that's correct. But of course, it's not correct, because the entry to the corner is defined by the way you brake into the corner. And if there's no real braking required because the engine's in super clipping mode, and all of a sudden you just come out of the throttle and all of a sudden you're going at exactly the speed you want at the corner, where's the skill? The skill factor in a Max being able to extend the straight has gone. And that's my point. It's no longer possible to extend the straight going in if the straight has been diluted. And I think if people don't get that, and I don't think many people, and I'm not saying this in a condescending way, but I don't think many people in the rulemaking department do understand that. It's because they've never differentiated in their minds the way that, say, the way George Russell drives and the way Max Verstappen drives. They've never seen a difference. It's all, they're both really quick, and George is better in traffic, or Max is better off, in whatever they want to say. Max is great in the late stage of the race, better tire management, or some sort of glib thing like that. But they'll never be specific about the fact that Max extends the straights going into a rotation point, whereas George doesn't. And because that's never been a factor in the way the rule makers, and to some extent, I think a lot of the engineers involved in Formula One with the teams have never really understood that or think it's important. That's why these rules have come in. But I think there will be some corners. There will be some corners coming up. There might be one or two at Suzuka. But more importantly, that ability to be supple and to multitask in a dynamic, in the way of managing the dynamic weights, is still a skill that will always be there, regardless of it being a boring 90-degree right-hander or not. You've still got that suppleness will always have an effect somewhere along the line. Sometimes difficult to enunciate it, but it will still have an effect. And that's the magic of Formula One driving, that now we have to look at some of these other areas, and maybe these fairly boring regs in terms of driving are going to show up other areas where a Max is doing something that we never really realized before. And that's a nice thing. It may be a change of direction, the way he's doing change of directions between left and a right-hander, a medium speed corner, first chicane at Imola, and not that we have Imola anymore, but that sort of thing, those sorts of moments will still be very important, I think. We can go on and talk about this for hours, and I think it's, it's annoying, isn't it? Things have changed, but you've got to accept it. What can you do, Russell, let's just finish this point. Russell drives like Senna. Yeah, I'd buy that, yeah. Better throttle application than Senna. Oops, that's upset all the Ayrton fans. But I think he does. He's pretty classic, and he's very precise, very, very consistent, and very astute. Antonelli drives like Prost. I wouldn't have said he's as good as Prost yet on fast corners. I mean, Prost ran Skivlak at Zandvoort when Skivlak was a real corner. Oh, unbelievably quick. And Prost in the very bad McLaren in his first year in Formula One, really, corners like, quick corners, he was on the edge, just in a way that you thought, oh, who is this? This guy's unbelievable car control. So I've never really had that feeling with Kimi on fast corners, I have to say. Now, I think Prost, from day one was very good on all types of corners and very good on braking, very good on rotation points, very good on traction. Yeah, made mistakes periodically earlier on in his career, but then he just backed off slightly from everything and just found this sweet spot of, he learned that from Nicky, I think, in '84, and then he just found that sweet spot of how to be super quick in a race, get the most from the tires, but not make mistakes or be allowed or allow himself to be hit by anybody else is another thing. So yeah, I wouldn't put him in the pros class yet, but potentially he could get there for sure. Sarosh, another question. Both Verstappen and Leclerc were of the same opinion. They're not liking these cars. Keep wondering as to how the Monaco Grand Prix will pan out. Might be dangerous in qualifying. No, I don't know. I can't even begin to imagine how Monaco is going to be, what these cars are going to be like. Is it going to be easier to harvest the energy that's available at Monaco? Because I presume they have less energy that you can harvest anyway. So therefore, that whole business of having to drone down the straights into corners won't necessarily show up very much. But I tell you what, if they do that going into Casino Square, if they ruin Casino Square for me, I will never forgive them, because that's still one of the great, that entry at the top of the hill, Massena into Casino Square, is one of the great parts of Formula One. And if they start super clipping into there and going in 30 kilometers an hour slower than they should, then somebody out there should be, taken outside and never seen again, because that to take that away from Formula One is one of the worst things you could possibly do, in my opinion. Blind brow, absolutely full on it, guardrail both sides, bumpy into that left-hander. You center of the road, left of center. You can. I mean, always remember chatting to Lewis once when he was having lots of battles with Nico, and I think it was, I don't know how, well, I can't remember the context of the conversation, but it was something like, it was before Monaco, and I said to Lewis something like, "So do you reckon you can have Nico around Monaco?" And he said, "Oh yeah." Lewis will deny all this. He said, "Oh yeah." And I said, "So where will the big difference be?" And he said, "Oh, into Casino Square for sure." He just said it like that and walked away. I thought that was so cool. And it's a great part of Formula One, that rate, that little bit there. And it's, if that's gone, I'll be very, very annoyed. Everywhere else, I'm kind of expecting entrance to the swimming pool to be diluted, because it's a bit dodgy, isn't it? So they'll probably do some clipping into that. But I presume Rascasse will be about the same, will it? Or maybe clipping into Rascasse, and then all of a sudden the difficulties of that approach into that left and then the right will have gone, because they're all going super slow. I don't know. It's annoying. But in a way, it's kind of fun thinking of one area which might still be okay, or looking to see which areas might still be untouched by all this. Dangerous in qualifying. Yeah, well, I think Liberty would say, well, bring it on, wouldn't they? Because look, qualifying at the moment is a pretty boring affair, they would say. And if having lots of cars on track if having lots of cars on a track that isn't big enough to take them all, or wide enough, or long enough, or whatever you want to say, big enough, I suppose is the right word, then that'll brighten up qualifying a bit, won't it? Not in a way that perhaps people are comfortable. Just going to do a quick check to make sure everything's going all right. Yeah, it seems to be live. Good. So yeah, Monaco. I think Charles will be thinking, how am I going to win Monaco? I think he'll be pretty confident, won't he? Because Ferrari looks to be a small turbo, quick, agile, chuckable race car, and Monaco's his home. And yeah, I think Charles will be feeling pretty good about Monaco, won't he? Tom K, welcome also as a member. Thank you very much, Tom. Very nice to have you on board. Tom K 761. Why is that not working? Okay, not quite sure why. That was the whole. Oh, there we go. Welcome to level 1. It's a bit of a reflex issue here, I think. Just having a look at the. I know what it is. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong screen. Got 2 screens. Multitasking. Not like Max Verstappen multitask, but nonetheless. Drew. Hi, Drew. Says, Peter, heard you in camera. Maybe Formula One teams don't want to show the tech because us regular engineers will fabricate our own parts and use them at the Thursday night tracks before Mercedes can put them on their road cars. Yeah, well, there you go. That's exactly the reason that Formula One loves to keep all this brilliant technology, of which it is so proud, hidden under wraps so that nobody can understand any of it and nobody even knows what it looks like. Does anybody know what a Formula One battery looks like yet? Or the difference between all the Formula One batteries, let's put it that way. Does anybody know what an MG UK looks like and where it's installed on all the cars and what all the wires are around it? No, why not? It's absolutely ridiculous. It just goes back to the point I was making at the start of the show that there's so much great stuff there in this iceberg that it's astonishing how much of it is just left in the trash cans with nobody able to see it. And I'm talking about, well, I say trash cans proverbially, obviously, but what I mean is in terms of what the public can have, this is the access we have, and all the rest of it, well, it's all, can't see that. Take it away. And it's such a shame. And that's why. And obviously, as you say, the reason obviously is that, all you guys are going to get out with your goggles and you're going to start fabricating all these bits and use them on the drags on Thursday night. Yeah, as you would. Drew says, Peter, Honda is facing financial trouble. CEO and top executives taking 30% pay cuts to, I'm quoting, demonstrate accountability. So Honda is just failing in Formula One and in real life. It's a shame. Well, it is a shame. And it's a shame in the build up to the Japanese Grand Prix as well. And it's a shame. I mean, it's interesting. Honda do quite a lot of the engines in Super Formula, and they have a big presence in Super GT as well in Japan. So they're very, very in your face company still. And to me, I mean, the right thing now actually is for Aston Martin to step up and say, and whether it's some new, spokesman, team principal, Andrea, whoever this, or Andrea, whoever that, standing up saying, Honda shouldn't be taking all the blame. We, Aston Martin, are taking some of the blame for this because we didn't do our job and operate as a proper partner in the development of this engine. And it was not good enough that we just allowed them and assumed that they would get on and understand what we wanted. We needed to be there for them and with them, operating as a true partner. And if Aston Martin did that, it would be a good thing. But I don't imagine they are going to do that because passing the buck's pretty standard procedure these days in motor racing. And it's a shame. I've always loved Honda as a company. I've got plenty of books on the Honda race programs over the years. I've probably got at least 5 books. And I used to love the Honda Formula One cars when they were racing. Not that I ever saw them, but I love the pictures and the sound, and you can still get video today. Listen to the sound of those V12s, horizontally opposed V12s. And then, of course, I did see the John Surtees V12 Honda 3-litre car in '67 at the Monaco Grand Prix and at Alton Park that year as a kid. Sounded amazing. John, of course, then winning that '67 Italian Grand Prix. Well, prior to that, Richie Ginther winning '65 Mexico. First win, I think, for Goodyear tyres in Formula One as well. And Honda over the years just done a superb job. And it's sad that I blame to some extent Formula One because it has this thing about, we are the team, that is the engine supplier, and we've got all these things about the engine has to be built like this and the template here and all that stuff, and everything becomes very departmentalized, and that's one of the reasons I guess Aston Martin allowed it to get away from them, and it's a shame. It's such a shame, and I have to say, if I had the money, I would buy a Honda S800 sports car tomorrow. I just still think they are the most gorgeous little sports cars, and it's a great regret that when they were really big in Australia and Noel Riley racing an 800 and going very well in it, that I was too young to have a driving license, let alone to buy a Honda S800. But I just love that car. It's one of the all-time great cars. Yeah, there have been some other good Honda road cars, but I would always have an S800 before any other Honda road car. Definitely. Zavij Dugal, another of our regulars. Hi there. I love the late 60s and early 70s era of Formula One. The development of aero is so fascinating to me. Can you recommend me some books or documentaries that cover that era of Formula One? What about Gentlemen Lift Your Skirts? That was the brilliant title Patrick Uden gave to his documentary about Williams in 1981, when, or was it 80, around that period anyway, when Williams were doing really well. And Patrick, very good friend, excellent director, producer of documentaries, made that great film, which did very well, I think. It's called Gentlemen Lift Your Skirt. So that would be one I would recommend. Books, well, I mean, Autocourse is your best thing, really, if you wanted to really get into that era, start buying. If you're into the whole ground effect thing and aero, you really need to start at what, about 70, 76, I guess. And you've got Mario Andretti sitting in the Long Beach breakfast room after the race on the Monday, and Colin Chapman there, a bit down as well. And they both look at one another and think, what are we doing? Why don't we go and work with one another? And Mario starts the great era with Colin, and Peter Wright comes in as well. And they start to realize that those side fuel tanks can do a lot if they have an undershape to them. And then one day at Imperial College, Peter Wright is realizing that one side of the car is suddenly dropping compared with the other, the Lotus 78 model, and realizes that it's because he's got a little bit of a trim tab below the side pod, and that's generating more downforce on that side, and starts experimenting with skirts on both sides. And then they go to South Africa and they try brushes and all sorts of things, Lexan and all sorts of different ways of bridging the gap between the side pod and the road. And all of a sudden Mario goes through sunset at Kyalami, and he comes back into the pit flat out, and he comes into the pits and says, man, we've done it. And that moment, that's when, ground effect really took off. And the Lotus 79 was the embodiment of that. One of the most beautiful racing cars, I think, ever certainly created by Colin Chapman. I was going to say by man, actually, and I think I'm right. So I buy all the autocourses around there because it's very good from race to race, and also the overall description of all the cars. So that would be my thing. Gentlemen Lift Your Skirts, and complete set of autocourse from, say, mid-70s to, I don't know, late 80s. Well, no, mid-80s. Lonely Planet, also welcome as a member. Thank you very much for joining us. Very kind. Right, just need to refresh here and get this going again. Here we are. Right, that one. Okay, next one. Zabez again. Apparently Merc advantages more on the phase just after the apex of a corner, where they can accelerate a lot better than Ferrari. Ferrari show better initial rotation and front end, but loses in the exit. Sounds complicated. Doesn't it all mean that basically the Mercedes has got more grip, isn't it? Isn't that that's what they've got? They've got more grip than Ferrari overall, more efficient downforce, and they've probably got a bit more usable power everywhere as a result. So, yeah, I mean, you can break all those things down. Depends what sort of corner you're talking about, of course. But it would be shocking if Mercedes didn't have an advantage on all parts of every corner, because they've got the best car. And that's what happens when you've got more downforce, more efficient downforce than anybody else, and you're also doing a very good job with as good a job as anybody with the power unit. Where are you going to get beaten? That's what it is all about. And that what you just described there is what McLaren had last year, for example, on any given day against Mercedes or Red Bull. So yeah, Ferrari shows better initial rotation and front end. What does that mean? That means they're having to compromise, probably, and that to get the front end to work, they're having to sacrifice a bit of the rear, and that's because they don't have as much overall efficient downforce as Mercedes. So you can, as I say, you can break it down to those tiny details, but basically it's just another way of describing the Mercedes having more downforce. Danny Jones, ready to hear how negative Peter will be today. Whilst I agree it's not peak Formula One, it's here now and we have to deal with it. Well, isn't that exactly what I said, Danny? I think you need to take the earplugs out of your ears, mate, and get a life. Next one. Abhishek Kranjan, new Formula One is about going efficiently into the corner and not as fast as you can, not as fast as you can go. The data shows Leclerc adjusting his driving style to Lewis watching his data, and the same will happen to Max. Lewis' experience will count. Yeah, I think you're right. It's efficiently into the corner and not as fast as you can go. What does that mean? It's a bit of a, you know, bit of a contradiction there, isn't it? I mean, as fast as you can go is as efficiently as you can go, is it not? I think I know what you're trying to say. Efficiently in terms of energy management and not necessarily as fast. But just to reiterate the point I made, the beauty of a great racing driver is his ability to extend the straight into a corner. And if that part of the straight that he used to be able to extend is now neutralized by not being on the power, then where is the advantage now for a great racing driver going into a corner? That is my point. And for the guy beforehand who was saying I was always negative, as I say, get a life, because I did say at the beginning of my last video, we have what it have, let's get on with it. It is what it is, let's get on with it and look at it from a racing perspective, which I did. So he obviously wasn't watching that. But beyond that, I reiterate the point. It's one thing to come up with a category of racing that's very good for energy saving and deployment and use around the lap. It's another to say, let's take away one of the great elements of Formula One driving. Two different things completely. And as I said earlier in the show, I think the reason that the second point was not given enough weight is because most people aren't interested in it, stroke, don't understand it, and have never thought it to be an issue. Whereas I do. I like to think that the reason Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton at his peak or Charles Leclerc now as well are as good as they are is because they do things differently to others. And if you don't want to understand what they're doing differently, that's fine. But I enjoy discovering what they do differently, and I will continue to enjoy that. It's from the same gentleman. New regs have put Lewis back again in the mix of winning his robbed 8th Elusive Drivers' Championship. This is such a joy for Lewis fans. Leclerc and Lewis would be joy, and Lewis is the most fair, clean racer of all time. Yeah, Lewis, very, very, very clean, fair racer. Excuse me, I'm going to have to sneeze. I always thought, what was my mum doing when she was doing that? She was trying to sneeze when she couldn't sneeze. Doesn't happen very often. She often did that. Yeah, Lewis, very, very clean, fair driver. I wouldn't say the same for Charles Leclerc at all. So expect fireworks there as the season progresses. Lewis back in the mix, definitely. It's neutralized some of the areas where Charles was good. And simultaneously, the circuit has, in terms of actually doing what Charles does, most of the circuits are throwing up less of an issue now for Lewis. And he's able to drive the car pretty much, in a relaxed way, feeling the back of the rear when he wants to. Good, very, very good car control, very good judgment. As I said, into that last corner in China, very good example. So yeah, it'll be close between those two. But I don't think, I'm not sure you were saying that. Joy and Lewis Lewis, very clean racer. I agree with that 100%. I wouldn't have said that about Charles Leclerc. So, stand back. Alessandro Durango. Hi, Peter. Despite losing his fight with Lewis, Charles looked happy and excited at the end of the race in China. Do you think Charles could actually benefit from Lewis's competitiveness this season? Well, as I said with Cameron, I think one of the reasons he wanted to put on a happy face in China is because there was quite a lot of talk over the China weekend of further mods that might be made to the regulations in order to even things up a bit more. And I think Ferrari at the moment probably want things to stay exactly as they are, given that obviously Mercedes are going to have this change with the compression ratio thing. And that can only be good for Ferrari. Not sure how much, but it'll make a difference. And so for your Ferrari at the moment, you just want things to stay absolutely the same. So I would have thought if Freddie Vasseur was doing his job, he would have said to both Charles and Lewis, regardless of what happens today, be very positive about this regulation. We don't want any changes made. Make everybody very relaxed and calm that Formula One has done a great thing and this is a great, great reg. And I think that's probably what happened. And I think Charles and knowing what a racer he is, I can't imagine he actually enjoyed China, because he wouldn't have wanted to get beaten, and secondly, it was, he didn't drive that well anyway. So yeah, I don't think it was a great day for Charles, but he put on a brave face, I think, for political reasons, and he did a good job because he's very sharp, smooth guy. Yeah, he's emotional. He's emotional in the race car, but in something as important as we don't want any rig changes now, keep things as they are. Of course, deep down inside, he does feel happy because Ferrari are competitive again, and he will be thinking, I've got half a chance to win a Grand Prix or two this year, maybe even more. And that's why he's feeling relatively good about life. That's my take on all that. Vicky. Hi, Peter. When Formula One made drivers' life easy by having traction control, paddle shifts, was there a question about driver skill referring to the current driver skill with battery regulation? Yeah, I mean, apart from Lando going over that fan in Melbourne, when I presume he was looking down at the dash when he should have been looking at the front of the, where he was going. Where else have drivers? And we haven't had any, apart from the starts, where we've had quite a few drivers make slow starts now in 2 races. In general, the drivers seem to be on top of what they need to be doing with the steering wheel. Although, of course, in the race in China, Charles didn't respond to his engineer saying, you got a chance to pass on the next lap on the straight, press button B. And he didn't do it. And he didn't do it because he didn't hear them and he wasn't really focused anyway. He was kind of bored with the whole thing, I think. So it's a bit of that. But no, and getting back to the point, I think what they've got to do on the steering, I think the drivers are pretty much on top of it, thanks to all the sim work they do and the way the engineers design the steering wheels anyway. So I don't think that's an issue. And so, when they went to paddle shifts, it was a way to make things faster because they could suddenly start changing gear without taking their hands off the steering wheel and having a little bit more feel for the wheel at any point of the corner. And once they got over the thing of, I remember when Damon first drove it at Silverstone in the Williams, every time he went over a curb, he changed gear because of the steering wheel doing that, boom. But once they got over that, it was, it was just another way of going quicker. But these battery regulations, of course, are a way of going slower. Actually, in terms of what a racing driver does in the car, yeah, you can get on top of all the buttons you need to press, and that's all fine. And they're doing that very well. But in reality, what they're doing is giving you 3 or 4 places a lap where the engine has to go much slower. And that's, is that an art, having to get used to that? As I keep saying, for me, the art is extending the straight into a corner and indeed out of a corner. And it makes it almost impossible in some corners to do that now with this new regulation. Vicky says, I think driver skill window, another member, by the way, thanks, Vicky. I think driver skill window is narrower than ever in these rigs. What is the point of huge pay for drivers if they're not, if not they are brand? Maybe after all these great Verlicam retire, it will not be about drivers anymore. Well, it definitely has brought, it's brought a lot of the drivers closer to one another. And the differentiation is now much smaller between an Isaac Hadjar and a Liam Lawson, definitely. And a lot of people would say that's great, isn't it? Because that means it's going to be more competitive and there's going to be more racing. And isn't that wonderful? Well, at what point do you draw the line? You might as well say, you could say, let's just make the cars much, much slower everywhere. And then everybody will be able to pass all the time on the outside of corners and everyone will be going the same speed. Isn't that amazing? So who comes around and wins the race after 2 hours of this? So it's a question of where you draw the line. For me, they've gone too far, as you know, but I'm not being negative in the sense that I think we should all give up and go away. I'm being negative in that I'm being objective and I'm saying the truth, which is that great racing drivers have much less scope now to show their ability. But on the basis that 99% of the population, because of the way the engineers in Formula One present Formula One, 99% of the population never really can understand that difference anyway, apart from the fact that their driver was in front and winning. A lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Max Verstappen is no longer able to show his speed over Liam Lawson. If they're both really quick racing drivers and they're both driving around racing hard, does it matter? I think it does. But obviously, a lot of people out there who control Formula One think it doesn't. And they would love to see Liam Lawson win a race. I keep using the example Liam Lawson because he hasn't won a race and he's a classic racing driver on the other end of the Max Verstappen spectrum. You know, he turns in very late, he breaks in a straight line, he's all reflexes and reactive driving, whereas Max is all manipulation and anticipation. And there's two different ends of the spectrum. So if the new regs produce racing that allows a Liam Lawson, because of the cars and because of the nature of the circuits and the corners, to be right up there with the other extreme, then, as I say, a lot of people will think that's a great thing. Not me, but a lot of people will. Vicky, shout out to Taka Katsuta on his first win in the 94th World Rally Championship event. What is it, your opinion, Rally Kenya 26? Yeah, I mentioned that. Oh, we had a good chat with Nirai Fukuzumi yesterday about the impact in Japan of Taka winning that Rally Kenya, the Safari Rally, and what it meant within the Toyota family and then also in Japan. So he was really into it, of course, as you would be. Yeah, great to see. I mean, he's a great guy. I've never met him, have to say. I've seen him, you know, been up close, never really spoken to him, but watched him a lot. And great rally driver, very quick. We spoke about him. I remember talking to Heikki Kovalainen about him, and he was saying how talented he was, and he'd known him for a long time. And yeah, it's just a great thing, isn't it? In general, I think the World Rally Championship this year is pretty, what's the right word? It's pretty bland, isn't it? I mean, Hyundai just don't seem to be on the case at all. And it's just a Toyota infight. And that's okay, because competing with the same car in any form of motorsport with great drivers is always worth watching. But it's a bit lame with the Hyundais not being there and not being quick. So yeah, don't be surprised to see quite a lot of, I mean, I would imagine Sami Pari is probably going to win a rally or two this year. He might even win his home rally in Finland, who knows? But going back to rally, the Safari Rally, to be honest, I thought it was a little bit too much. To me, it was more of an endurance event in which the guy who had the least trouble and had the least number of punctures won the rally, providing obviously you're in a quick car, as distinct from one that actually rewarded pace and ability over a 2.5 day period with a lot of corners. And so it's my least favorite rally only because of that. It's just not all about pace. It's about endurance. And you could say, well, it's good to have one rally like that in the championship every year. We need an endurance show, and that's fine. I'll buy that. But at the same time, yeah, you know, I'm just pleased it gave that win to Taka, and that's what it'll be remembered for, I think. Terrible weather conditions. Cancelled a few stages, didn't they? And yeah, but good. Congrats to him. Vicky, again, I think if there was increase in downforce, the drivers couldn't follow closely through the corners and should be able to close up at the end of the straights using battery, and there's a chance of good defense. Yeah, but they're not going to increase downforce because they're so worried about the cars not being quick and in top speed. Even now, I think they're worried about it. So that's not going to happen. Yeah, you can play around with this. It's all little band-aids, isn't it? It's the whole thing it's too many band-aids on it. It's too much of a compromise and not enough emphasis on the great drivers, the great corners, and proper racing and defense. Too much emphasis on lots of overtaking and electrification in order to have lots of manufacturers in Formula One. Some people think that's great. You know, no problem with that. Adam, UK 90C, do these regs risk devaluing a title if it's more systems management than driver skill? If so, wouldn't GR benefit long-term from pushing for more driver-centric rules, even if it makes winning harder? I think GR, if you mean by George Russell, uh, or do you mean Toyota GR Yaris? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. But anyway, if you mean George, uh, would he's quite happy. I mean, he's the one guy that's going to be saying, no, 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 these regs are brilliant. He just wants to win a world championship. Thank you very much. Then you can talk about all the other stuff. So yeah, there's that. The Do these regs risk devaluing a title if it's more systems management than driver skill? Well, it depends how much value you put on the title in the first place, doesn't it? How much value did you put on Mike Hawthorne winning the 58 World Championship and not Sterling Moss? Did you think any the less of Sterling as a result of that? I didn't. Not that I was around in 58, but watching, but I know what happened, and it didn't change my opinion of Sterling Moss at all. And what value did you put on Jim Clark not winning the World Championship in 1967, even though he won the most races? Didn't change my opinion of how good Jim was, even though Denny won it. So it's a question of what you think about with the World Championship, isn't it? Whoever wins this year will have driven very, very well on a number of different circuits, variety of different types of circuit, different weather conditions, in a new formula requiring a lot of physical multitasking on the steering wheel and understanding of what to do at any given moment from an engineering standpoint. And also occasionally done something pretty spectacular on a specific type of corner that works for them. But it won't be the same as, 2021 Lewis versus Max, that's for sure, where it was an absolute and you had absolute peaks and speeds through great corners. And we saw a huge similarity between Lewis and Max. It won't be that. It will always be related to power surges and power management and power harvesting, energy harvesting. And that's, that to me is not as good. So I can't say any more than that. Adam, up again from Adam. Similarly, if current regs blur driver differences, does that make it harder for George Russell to build a strong legacy? As he doesn't care about his legacy, he just wants to win the championship. What people then say about him, oh, well, he wasn't really as good as James Hunt or whatever they want to say, then that's for them to say. But in the same way that Michael said, I don't really care about the history of the sport or the records that I've set, Max says the same thing. No racing driver thinks in terms of those terms. They just want to win and get out there and be with the best team at any given moment and do the best job they can and win races. That's all it is. So George won't mind at all. And he'll know that the legacy will come from the brand, the Mercedes brand, and the global footprint that he will have with the Merc brand forevermore, regardless of what he does in 2027 and beyond. If he's world champion this year, he's a world champion in a Mercedes, and that's huge. Nothing more, nothing less. Hurricane OK1. Hi, Peter. Should the FIA step in and stop Aston from racing? Alonso, this is just after Lawrence Stroll's put out this long press release about how delighted he is to have secured the name of Aston Martin forevermore in Formula One heritage. You're saying the FIA should stop Aston from racing. I love it. Alonso having to take both hands off the wheel of an F1 car at over 300 seems outrageously dangerous to everyone on track. Well, yeah, they've got vibration, they got this, they got that. They've got an engine program that's about 9 months behind the times. And, but it's his team. He should have been out there in Japan. Or if it's your Formula One team and you just hired Adrian Newey, wouldn't you be out in Japan making sure Honda were okay? Or would you be trying to get the name of Aston Martin secured for perpetuity in the history of Formula One? Yeah, lots of people not doing what they should be doing in that team. And it's a shame. It's a shame because Honda are a great company and they're being tarnished now and they'll be in shame at the Japanese Grand Prix probably. And should the FA step in and stop Aston from racing is your question, though. Wouldn't it be funny if they did? Halt, you will not leave the pit lane. Brilliant. You're going to be replaced by one of the F2 teams, far more deserving. They've done a great job. We're going to put Invicta are going to be given Formula One franchise, your franchise. Fabulous, wouldn't it? Well, we could only laugh. Seshdari. Hi, Peter. No talk of short corners from you. How blasphemous. Well, that's not true. I've just been talking about short corners, but I know you asked this question before I did all that. So anyway, I've kind of gazumped you there. Surely they still matter in corners where they are not lift and coasting. What have you noticed? Well, the notice at the moment that most of the places where you could actually see them using short corners, that I talked to them, Max, Charles, and a few others, was where they do have to lift and coast. So there aren't many corners yet. We've seen where you can. I mean, turn 10 in Melbourne was one where you could do. Where they did a really nice job. That went, and turn 7 in China. So as I keep saying, we'll see what happens in Japan. I fear the Degners will be neutralized. I'm pretty sure turn 1A, 1B will be neutralized. And that basically leaves Spoon, the long left-hander before the back straight, which was always a bit of a line lock corner anyway. Not much you could do. It's such a long corner there, long radius corner. 130R, I guess, will be easy flat, probably because they won't be going in quickly anyway. And then there's the chicane, which is the chicane. Interesting corner because it's quite difficult to sight yourself into the chicane. The track falls away a little bit. There's not a lot on the behind it, and quite often it's, if you've got a good lap going, it's quite easy to brake too early into the chicane. And then that long right hander where it's not really a corner, is it? I mean, I know people go off there, but it's down the hill. So I'm not holding my breath that we're going to see a massive number of places that are obviously visible for drivers like Max to show their worth around Suzuka this year. But there may be places where we've never, as I said before, we've never really thought about it. And we see Max doing something, well, that's a bit different. Yeah, that's nice how he's doing that, coming out of the S's at the top of the hill or whatever. That might be a place. Top of the hill S's might be a place where we might see something. DBY90, hi Peter, thoughts on why McLaren can't get the PU humming like Mercedes? What do you think is making this gap? Odd the reigning Constructors' Champions can't sort it out. Well, I mean, in fairness to McLaren, Mercedes nearly didn't get George out in Q3 due to an electrical problem. So it's not just McLaren. It's obviously something there with something to do with the electrics on that engine that's a bit fragile, and it hit both McLarens. And then simultaneously you've got Alpine getting a nice performance from the Mercedes PU now in a fairly average chassis when it comes to overall downforce efficiency. And I think they're a little bit overweight from what I gather as well. So the engine's working well in the Alpine, obviously working well in the factory cars. And so if Alpine can get the PU to work reliably, as they did in China, you've got to assume McLaren will now. There was some issue with the way they installed the electrics, or something had happened there that was common to the factory team. I think the difference at the moment is more just that the McLaren doesn't have as much overall efficient downforce as the Mercedes. Glibly said by P. Windsor, because it's a way of explaining one car being slower than another. But I think in this world of aero and downforce, that is the situation. I don't think McLaren have as much overall downforce as Mercedes, usable overall downforce that they can use to trim the car. They're probably running as much as they can, given the speed they need to be on the straight, and the wing level they need for the corners and so forth. That is less downforce over the lap than the Mercedes team are able to run. And I think it's more that. And that is a surprise to me, because they had the building blocks from last year. I know the aero rigs are changed and there's a lot different, but nonetheless, one good car engenders another, generally speaking, in Formula One, regardless of rule changes. And McLaren seemed to have missed something slightly on this car. There were flashes of it being quick in China, and we don't know roughly where they would have been had they raced. Would they have beaten Ferrari? Probably not, but they probably wouldn't have been that far behind. It looks like in order to get the car to be reasonably quick, they have to use the tyres more, which would suggest, again, less downforce. And that's what they need to be fighting. And they've got a big advantage, not a big advantage, they've got to help now with these 2 race cancellations. So we'll see. We can make a proper call by the time we get to, was it Miami? I guess, yeah. Can they boost the engine power by 5 to 10%? Will be a software change or engine changes required? I'm sure they can. This is from Lonely Planet 3. 5 to 10% boost of engine power. I think they've got enough there to be able to do that. Whether, I think it's a number of different parameters you could change on the engine in order to get that. I don't think you'd need to change an engine to do that. I think that's the question you're asking. Nish7265, I still miss the old days. Any chance of Formula One reintroducing refueling during pit stops? With all these batteries and stuff around, you want to have refueling as well. You know, Pastor Maldonado won that Spanish Grand Prix, but there was quite a serious fire afterwards, wasn't there? Anyway, no, I don't think there is. Partly because I don't think Formula One, from a cosmetic point of view, would want to have the image of fuel being poured into a car at a time when it's trying to present itself as being very electric and very energy efficient. And I think that it's just that visual that they wouldn't want. A. B, last time we had refueling, there was a lot of inconsistency between one FIA fuel dispensing unit and another from team to team. Very difficult to have all of those identical. And it's obviously the rate of fuel that comes through the line there. And then there's the whole Felipe Massa thing in Singapore when he went down the pit lane with half the rig still attached to the car. When was that? 08? Yeah. And then what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. And then there's just the general, we got a lot going on. We got all those guys doing those tire stops, all those guys around the car that doing the 2.5 second tire stops. And is it then something you'd want to have fuel for? It would take away, I guess, the whole business of those 2.5 second tire stops, wouldn't it? Don't think Formula One wants to lose that. I think they should. I think they're too dangerous, really, and there's too many people involved, and the tire stops should be longer, and that would bring in more overtaking, in effect, because the teams would, once you make the tire stop an 8-second stop, there's more chance an 8 can become a 9, or an 8 can become a 7.5, and all of a sudden you got your overtake. And I suggested that a while ago and was shot down in flames by the powers that be on the basis that it was one of Formula One's great calling cards, this lightning fast pit stop, and they didn't want to lose that cosmetic either. So, yeah, no refueling, I think. Diamond Dog says, as Peter says last stream, this variation of Formula One reflects the DTS generation. Well, I'm outlived this sport since '89, and yeah, it's just not the same. Yeah, it's, it is about generations. As I said at the start of the show, it's about your perspective of Formula One. And some people may say, yeah, Peter's being very negative. But in order not to have that sort of criticism thrown in my face, I would need to be saying, isn't this brilliant? All these overtakes. I love Formula One. Oh, isn't it great? And just constantly eulogizing about whatever I was watching. And that would be fine if I wanted to be mindless and not aware of the depth of Formula One's history and heritage and its texture and the great drivers we've seen and known and watched over the years. And if you immediately apply a texture to whatever you're watching right now, it takes on a different guise. As I say, you can come in having never seen a Formula One race before and think China was absolutely wonderful, and then listen to Peter Windsor on his post-race video saying, well, that wasn't really overtaking, that wasn't really racing. And you'd think, what's this grizzly old bloke talking about? Well, it's a question of taking some time and thinking about it and finding a context from which to make your assessment. I have no problem, of course, why would I, with anybody who's never watched Formula One before, watching China and thinking it's the greatest sport on earth. That's fine. But that's not me. I can only talk for myself. All we can ever do in life is look through our own lens and think about our own shortcomings and hopefully some of our qualities and the ways we can improve and the way we can think about moving forward as a human being. And if we apply that logic to a sport we love, like Formula One, all you can do is look at where it is and say, well, because we did this in the past, this should work in the future, or whatever we want to do. Or, but this racing driver was able to show how good he was in those conditions, but he's unable to show it in these conditions. Isn't that interesting? That's what I mean by putting something in context. And yeah, you can be glib about it, and you can jump up and down and say how wonderful it all is in a rather juvenile way, or you can try to have some sort of feel for what the sport is really all about. And so that's what I think. Rao 5160, what is your favorite Mansell win, and what were the post-race parties like? Well, I'll get on to the post-race parties first, and because there really weren't any. I mean, I was thinking the other day that yes, there was that cafe in Soho, which has long since closed, been replaced by some sort of chain of coffee shops that used to make cheese and pickle rolls that were extremely nice. But there's never been anybody on the planet Earth better than Roseanne Mansell when it came and comes to making cheese and pickle rolls. By pickle, I mean Branston pickle in the bottle, the brown stuff, with cheddar cheese in exactly the right sort of white bun, with exactly the right amount of white butter, and exactly the right number of rolls that brought to the racetrack on any given day. Enough for N. Mansell, P. Windsor, S. Thin, and a few others. And so, yeah, you know, what was it like? It would be after the British Grand Prix, 3 hours after the race, when I'd done Parc Fermé and all the rest of it was over and I could take my Williams shirt off and hang around, I'd go and find Nigel's caravan in the BRDC camping lot, and there'd be a few heavies around to stop people coming into the barricade, through the barricade, but there would be Nigel, and there'd be a few family members and a few of his mates, be about 8 of us, 9 of us, and there would be cheese and pickle rolls. What can I tell you? That was it. So yeah, none of that, log cabin Suzuka riotous behavior of which so many drivers have been guilty over the years, or indeed people like myself have been guilty. No, with Nigel, it was always something very simple and very nice. And I always remember those days very fondly. Best win? I don't know. I think one of his best drives was definitely Portugal 85, from the pit lane to P5 in the wet. One of his best win. I mean, I was very lucky, very privileged to meet Nigel when he was completely unknown in 78. Yeah, going to get the right decade now, 78, and still to be friends with him today, and to help him all the way into Formula One, and then into Lotus, and then into Williams. I didn't help him into Ferrari, got to say, and then into Williams, and then to be manager when he was winning at Williams. So from that perspective, I think I'm lucky that, not many people have been had the privilege to find a young driver at the beginning of their career and basically work with him all the way up into Formula One in the way that Ron did with Lewis. And you could argue Toto with Kimi in a way, because that they did that in the sense of the choosing of the guy. But then again, they had a lot of wherewithal in both cases to help that driver into Formula One. Whereas in my case, I had nothing other than my pen, my typewriter, as it was then, and my ability to get up early in the mornings and write 3 or 4 letters to potential sponsors before I started work every day for about 4 years, to help Nigel raise money for Formula 3. And to do all of that, and then eventually to win a Grand Prix, as we did at Brands in 85, for me was, it's one of the greatest moments of my life. I thought there's only I can say. Was it his greatest win? I don't know. But for me, it was everything that I'd worked for since 78, all happened, all came together in that day at Brands in 85, when he won that European Grand Prix. And what a great circuit on which to do it as well. And that's something I'll never forget and I'll always love. I actually really enjoyed his win in South Africa after that as well, 2 in a row, because it was like all of a sudden everybody respected Nigel and they kind of expected him also to go and win. And he did. He just went out and blew everybody away. And it was, okay, Keke was very good as well, but Nigel was really superb. And for me, he was driving exactly the same way as he always had driven in Formula 3 the first time I'd seen him. It's just that finally now he had a car and a team and everything around him to do the job. So that's a great, great feeling. But thanks for asking the question. Jays 8964. Hi, Peter. Have you read Duncan Hamilton's autobiography, Touch Wood? Fascinating, entertaining insight into an exciting, glamorous, but dangerous era. Thoughts on Duncan as a man, as a driver? I have, and I've got it. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but it's here in the bookcase. Yeah, absolutely. What a great title, Touch Wood. Obviously referring to the wood rim steering wheel. And yeah, when I read the book, I haven't read it for a long time since. I've read it once. When did I read it? Early 70s. But I remember thinking at the time, in a way, I'm glad motor racing isn't like that anymore, that it is a bit more serious and professional. Not that Duncan Hamilton in any way was unprofessional, but you know what I mean. I'm just talking about the Sterling Moss approach to being a racing driver compared with the Duncan Hamilton way of being a racing driver and the outrageous, Wolf Bernardo. He was a Wolf Bernardo of that next era, wasn't he? And that whole Bentley boys thing continued with the whole Duncan Hamilton way of going racing. And, the nip of whiskey before Le Mans and all the great stuff. And he was very quick. And he, how do you quantify a lot of these drivers? If you think about Froilan Gonzalez, who was not a slim, svelte Alan Prost physique, nor was Duncan Hamilton. So you sort of figure these, you thinking that, they couldn't have been that good. But of course, if you think of a guy like Gonzalez or indeed Hamilton, they were super quick in their own way. I imagine he was pretty, late entry, oversteery, opposite locky, reactive driver, but I don't know for sure because I never actually saw him drive. But yeah, a great book. I recommend it to anybody. Just as I recommend the book I mentioned last week, the Alan Stacey book as well. If you haven't had a look at that, please do. I mean, what a hero that guy was. To lose the lower half of his leg in a motorcycle accident when he was basically a youth, and then to go on to be a super competitive racing driver, driving Formula One for Lotus with hand throttle. I mean, just staggeringly good. Such a shame, but a beautiful book, a really nice book. Okay, Aaron says, Peter, I don't mind these rules because each piece of criticism is one side of a two-sided coin. Mainly, I find it impressive how fast the cars are around the lap with so much less starting fuel. The ability to have extended wheel-to-wheel battles is a bonus, and I don't really mind where the lap time comes from, corners or straights, although, of course, I suspect I'll miss the likes of Pouen if the PU is the limiting factor of grip. Yeah, well, that's one way to look at it. And as you say, there's two sides to every coin, and as I said to Cameron, you're going to have, if you actually limit the power that the drivers can use into corners 3 or 4 times on any given lap, you're going to have lots of passing on the outside. Of course you are. And it's just like the formation lap, isn't it? They accelerate, they do their burnouts, and then they slow down again. They accelerate, do their burnouts. Yeah, they can all go round 2 abreast there. And I don't know. To me, I'm an absolute purist, and I just love to see a driver on the absolute limit around the complete lap, getting the ultimate performance from a racing car without any compromise. That's what I like. That's what I've always liked. But I'm not going to walk away from the sport, and I'm not going to become cantankerous about it because, as I keep saying Michael, because Michael was the first guy I ever heard to say this. It is what it is. And there is a championship out there to be won. And there are storylines, George versus Kimi, Ferrari against Mercedes, Charles versus Lewis. Can Max make a comeback? Can Aston Martin Honda get it together? Can Alpine win a Grand Prix with Pierre Gasly? You know, there are lots of storylines, and a storyline is a storyline, regardless, as you say, of whether they're doing 100 miles an hour or 150 miles an hour through a corner. What do you think about the critics that Max is receiving lately and people calling him overrated because he couldn't adapt to the regulations? Well, totally absurd. If anybody thinks that the reason that Red Bull is slow is because Max is driving it much slower than the car is capable of going, then really they need to go and play tiddlywinks, I think, because it's obviously not the case at all. And I got to, I was just saying to Cameron, Max, what do you want from Max? I mean, he's a 4 times world champion. He's an outspoken human being. He only loves racing and racing fast and hard. He's not interested in politics. He's not interested in diplomacy. And so if he does these press conferences and somebody says to him, what do you think of the new regulations, Max? He's got 2 options. He can either, well, he's got 3. He could say no comment, or he could say, I think they're wonderful, really good. Congratulations to the FIA coming up with something that's so good. I love it. I love these cars. Such a shame ours isn't brilliant, but we'll be there soon. Or he can say, I think they're a load of old rubbish. It's not what racing's all about. And if anybody thinks that's what racing's all about, then they don't really know the sport. What's he going to say? Of course he's going to go with the 3rd one because he's Max Verstappen. Everybody knows that. And if you don't want him to say that, don't ask him. As simple as that. He's easy to read. He's a very open book, Max Verstappen. And that's why I like him, because he does call a spade a spade. And I don't have any sympathy for people that don't understand that, because, it's just like saying to Patrick Head, do you think it's important for a racing driver to have a good feel for politics and to be able to talk to the FIA in a way that the FIA will find comfortable, Patrick? Or do you think it's more important for a racing driver just to be fast? What do you think Patrick Head would say? It's just a question of what people expect. And of course, a lot of journalism these days is based around, well, I'm not going to say this because I might get into trouble. I might be wrong. So I'll ask Max Verstappen to say it. And if he says something controversial, then I've got my story. And a lot of it is that, Max, how can anybody criticize Max for anything? I mean, he's just a very, very good racing driver. And bless him, there he is at the Nürburgring this weekend driving a proper car. A race car that doesn't slow down, that places on the lap, unless he wants it to, around the world's greatest racetrack. Everybody should be celebrating that, not in any way giving him a hard time. Why give the guy a hard time? And I think, as I said to Cameron, I think if he was in a Merc right now, I don't think he would be showing it necessarily massively to either George or to Kimi. I think he'd be getting a hard time from both of them, because I think that these cars do neutralize quite a lot that's going on. But I still think he would be saying these cars, okay, we're winning and it's good, I'm happy, but it's not real racing. I'm sure he'd still be saying that. It's nothing to do with the fact that he's not quick. It's just that he doesn't, unlike Charles Leclerc, who doesn't want anything to change and wants Ferrari to do well. From his point of view, 4 world championships, all he wants is good racing. Been there, done that. All he wants to do is race closely in proper cars on the limit. Yep. Rao 5160. If Hamilton is close to Leclerc because he's being neutralized, then how did he get 102 poles before the ground effect era? He's not just always quick. Well, the cars are neutralizing some aspects of the lap and the way the car is driven on the lap in a way that no racing car in the history of the sport has ever neutralized them. No racing car in the history of the sport has ever been designed to slow down before some corners every lap. Never. So Lewis is always going to be quick in any given racing car, and he's not as quick now as he was at the back end of 2021 for reasons we've been talking about endlessly. But because these regulations have come in as they are, because Ferrari have done a pretty good overall job with the car, and suddenly driving the lap is rewarded by P3 or P2 or even P1, whereas driving the lap that felt more or less the same is rewarded last year by being P9, because things are suddenly at the top and it's quite exciting, it's good. It's good for Lewis. It's great for Lewis. And he's going to get more confident and he's going to drive very well throughout the year. I'm sure he is. But it doesn't mean to say that, well, I don't know what, I'm not quite sure what you're saying there, really. I mean, 102 poles before the ground effect era. Yeah, the ground effect era came in, in 2022 with all that bouncing and stuff. And it was terrible on the Mercedes. But before that, it wasn't as if we didn't have downforce. I mean, what do you mean by the ground effect era? We still had ground effect before 2022. It just wasn't harnessed in the same way when the car didn't have the same center of pressure. But he still had a lot of downforce and he was still very, very quick. And nobody's ever said that Lewis wasn't super, super quick. One of the greatest racing drivers in the history of the sport in the way he drove right up till the end of 2021. I've never said that he was anything other than that. Post 21, when Mercedes gave him a horrendous racing car that bounced like crazy with a moving center of pressure that they couldn't control, the car was pretty uncompetitive and he had a hotshot, very young, very quick guy alongside him prepared to take maybe more risks than Lewis, then that was a different story. And here we are today in a car that's more sanitary, doesn't have the same bouncing. It's got other challenges which are weird because it's actually neutralizing some of the corners and obliging the drivers to slow into some of the corners every lap of the race. And all of a sudden, these regulations have allowed Lewis to be right up there with Charles and Ferrari to be right up there with Mercedes. Great. Good luck to them. Good luck to Lewis. Good luck to everybody involved. But it doesn't mean anything more than that. Okay? That's my opinion anyway. Super chat here. Thank you very much for Kevin Kavora. Hi, where is Paddy Lowe, one of the men behind Mercedes' 2014 success? I think he would be best for Aston Martin to have him. Well, that's a good question. I mean, he's doing that zero petroleum thing, isn't he? I'm not quite sure how that's going right now. Been lots of publicity last year or the year before. I think they did a deal with Sauber or something. One of the F1 teams, I think, was looking into the whole zero petroleum idea of Paddy. And I think he's still basically doing that. And he was, I mean, would he be a good guy on that? Yeah, I guess he would. You know, he and Steve Wise were the key guys at Williams from what my understanding of the active ride program we had in 90, 91, 92, 93. And he then went to Merck, did a good job at Merck. So he went to McLaren, did a very good job at McLaren, then a good job at Merck, and then went to Williams and then fell foul of the whole system there, as you would. But whether he's the right guy now, I don't know. I mean, we need to talk to Gavin White, really, and I will be soon. I just wanted to give a little bit of space to Gavin because we had him on the show and I don't want to overstay my welcome with him, but it'd be really good to get his input on what might potentially be going on with batteries right now, and particularly from a Honda perspective, and how long it would take to do a completely new battery. And indeed, can they do a new battery anyway? Would that such a thing be possible legally within the regs? Luca Mad, is there a way to modify these set of rules in order to regain traditional racing? No. Everybody's signed up to them, and they signed up to them a long time ago. And when various comments were made in the early years, we're talking about, probably 2 years ago now. Oh yeah, but if you start limiting the power on going into some corners on all of the circuits in order to harvest energy, you're going to be diluting some of the great corners. That was very quickly shouted down as being an unimportant factor. And so here we are. We don't have traditional racing purely because that was never considered, as I said at the start of the show, considered to be an important point. Eddie English, I love Formula One, but the DRS era was difficult. Now I am done. Could you convince me otherwise? Now it's just bumper cars. Well, I will convince you otherwise because the intra-team battles between George and Kimi and Lewis and Charles will be fascinating this year. Both the teams are good, both the teams are competitive, and all four drivers are really quick. So that'll be an interesting reason to watch every Grand Prix. McLaren should come back to a very competitive level, and there should be a really interesting battle between Oscar and Lando. It's not quite as much of a given as the battle between the top two teams at the moment, but it should be there. Then you've got the rise and rise of Pierre Gasly in the Alpine Mercedes, who has got that good P6 under his belt now, and that will then should springboard him into a P4, maybe a podium before long. He's very good, Gasly, in my opinion. Then you've got Red Bull powertrain, Ford with Max, a sort of wild card that you've got to assume at some point, probably second half of the year, will start to be right up there again. And then in between, maybe a wet race or two where somebody like a Max could do something as well. And so that's an interesting storyline. And then finally, in my opinion, the other one is going to be, Adrian Newey having done a pretty poor job so far of developing that car from front to rear, by which I mean including the power unit, realizing that. And can we then yet see yet another great car from Adrian Newey once he gets on top of everything? And that's another great storyline. So there's what, 6 good storylines. If you forget about all the other stuff, the neutralizing of the drivers, the neutralizing of the corners and the drivers, the great drivers, if you forget about that and you accept it for what it is that the Netflix generation have wanted us to watch and which Liberty have obviously catered for, then those storylines will be interesting, won't they? And we'll still be getting excited about them, that's for sure. So there we go. Addyboy 0190. Hi Peter, there was a lap visualizer comparing Oscar's pole lap last year to Antonelli's this Chinese Grand Prix, and Antonelli was nowhere near the racing lines Oscar was on, nowhere near the limits of performance. Well, no, of course he wasn't, because he's not on the limit going around corners, some of the corners. And as I said to Cameron, we don't actually see the G meter much these days, do we? Because it's probably quite embarrassing. And I talked about turn 7 in the context of Mark Webber in a ill-handling Jaguar, and how spectacular that corner is when the car is a dog. Sorry, Dexter, not a dog, a water buffalo. Not there's much wrong with water buffaloes either. I love them. But anyway, if the car is difficult to drive, turn 7 was the corner you did not want to be going through. And now turn 7 is just, yeah, what's that all about? I just, that's why, if you want to watch, can you imagine that 88, the famous 88 Senna pole lap of Monaco, if they did a sort of 2026 version of that lap, what it would have been like? He's going up the hill into Casino. Okay. Addy Boy says, I think it's much safer because thanks to super clipping, all the corners where you're at the limit is taken so far from the limit. Well, of course it's safer. Absolutely. That's why we're able to go around side by side. It's a little bit like the old thing of left foot braking versus right foot braking. And when you've got your understeer, you start dabbing the brakes with the left foot to get the back end to balance out the understeer, and suddenly the understeer's gone. You got the back end, the car feels good again, and you think, wow, that's great. I can do that. And then you realize that by putting the brakes on with your left foot, you've actually made the car 5 miles an hour slower through the corner than you were going with the understeer. That's the problem. That is the problem, that you can make the cars slow enough to be absolutely neutral, to have no vices whatsoever, and to be able to go around corners side by side, sometimes 3 abreast. But what is the point? You might as well drive around at 10 miles an hour and do that. And then just see who's in front of the last lap. It depends how far you want to take all that. And already I can see cars going through cops 3 abreast, probably. It's a wide corner. It's a wide track at Silverstone. Diamond Dog says Mikas McLaren West is in Mercedes-Benz World at Brooklands. Good. Great. You're probably talking to somebody else there, I think, Diamond Dog. But anyway, thanks for that info. Warland007, Peter, will you do a watch along for Nürburgring 24 and help noobs like us understand the race more? You've got to be joking. You want me to do a lap chart of the 24-hour race at Nürburgring? I was looking through the entry list yesterday. It's like, 5,000 runners, aren't there? No, thank you. I'll join everybody else, and I'll just do a Netflix thing and come in and zoom in after the race and watch a few highlights. I think 24-hour race is a bit like rallying. A lot of fun if you're doing it yourself. Not a lot of fun to be watching. So there you go. Jason Joe Laviat, was it more important for Hamilton to get the better of Leclerc in the Chinese Grand Prix than the other way round? Depends what you mean by more important. More important in terms of how well they slept on the Sunday night in China on the way home, or you mean for the year ahead, or you mean what Ferrari think about you, or bonus money in your contract? I mean, if anything else, if nothing else rather, China will have woken up Charles a bit, I think, and it'd be fun to watch Charles. There's another reason to love Formula One. Charles Leclerc in Japan, he'll be definitely wanting to beat Lewis, won't he? And so, yeah, watching Charles in Japan will be quite fun. I can't say it was. Beating another driver is always important. When has it not been important to finish ahead of the driver in front of you? If you see what I mean. Famous story. Rob Wilson and Nigel Mansell battling for 9th place at Thruxton in Formula 3 and avoiding a puddle, standing water on the middle of the very, very fast, bumpy right-hander on the back of the circuit. Lap after lap after lap, they go round the puddle, as everybody else is doing. But on the last lap, Nigel just goes straight through it, full opposite lock, flat out in the march to get 8th place. Not even in the points, but they did that for 8th. That's why Nigel Mansell is the racer that he is. And Max is the same, for sure. Charles too. Couldn't do it on Lewis in China. Tires went off, I guess. Another super chat. Debbie Maffio. Masterclass by Lewis Hamilton. The car has Lewis Hamilton DNA. Yeah, good. Probably has. I think it's also got Charles Leclerc DNA and other racing drivers' DNA, but I think this is a car that does actually work for Lewis, so that's good. Jason Jovelovic again. Do Ferrari strategists suffer from analysis paralysis? In Australia, it seemed obvious they should have pitted a driver. The team squandered a win chance again. Shouldn't Fred have stepped in? Yeah, absolutely. And I don't understand why he doesn't. I really don't. I just can't say. I mean, there's so many things that Fred has not done at Ferrari that I imagined he would do because he was the great Freddie Vasseur from ART, that I'm just given up, really. I don't know what to say. Of course he should have. Timmy Friday. Hey, Peter. Your thoughts about how ethics and personality should feature in Formula One. Many of the big names in management are ruthless and disagreeable. In contrast, papaya rules felt noble, and I liked it. Right. Well, I don't know. And many of the big names in management are ruthless and disagreeable. Well, that's the same as the world over, isn't it? Formula One is a microcosm of the world. So, yeah, if you want to learn lessons very quickly and you want to apply them to real life, Formula One is a good place to be watching. But yeah, most of them are ruthless and disagreeable. Papaya rules. Yeah, I mean, I don't see McLaren had any option. Papaya rules would probably mean they're allowed to race, but what option did they have? Once they've made the classic error of breaking up a really good driver partnership between Lando and Daniel, and they put Oscar in there, who was super quick, much quicker than Daniel. Well, not much, but significantly quicker than Daniel. Then they always had a problem there as to what to do. And the alternative to saying we're going to favour Lando mid-season or we're going to favour Oscar mid-season, both those alternatives were impossible from a sponsorship PR management point of view, because there would have been such an outcry that it would have affected the overall performance of the team. So the only thing they could do is basically say, well, you know, we've messed it up, but we'll just let it run now. I keep saying mess it up. A lot of people say, no, they won the championship, everything was brilliant. But my point is, they didn't need to do that. They could have won the championship in a much more logical, harmonious way with Lando and Daniel. Lando would have been drivers' champion. They would have won the constructors easily without any of the aggro. And Oscar could have stayed at Alpine for 1 year, and he'd probably be in Kimi Antonelli's car now. That, and I've always said that, but or maybe Lewis's car now. And they didn't need to do any of that. But having done it and made the mistake of messing up a really good driver combination, all they could do was let them both race. There was no way of doing anything else. Mike Tyson, 85. Should Max go to Merck, win 2-3 titles and retire? Well, it depends on, a little bit depends on how the second half of this year goes. I've always said, you know, Max needs to know where Red Bull are before he makes a decision on whether to leave this great team, race team that is. And we're not quite there yet, are we? I mean, if by Monza, I think I said this in a couple of live streams ago, if by Monza it's pretty clear that Red Bull have lost the plot, then of course he needs to be thinking of what he's going to do next year and what team to drive for. But would it be Merck? I mean, what would Merck be? What would Merck look like? It would be George Russell, probably world champion, and Merck. Would Merck get rid of Kimi after all this? Would Toto do that? You know, he's taken him this far and he's runner-up in the world championship and he's won Grand Prix. Would he get rid of him? Good question, isn't it? Maybe he's more likely, I suppose, to sell George and do a deal with, I don't know, whoever, for George to go somewhere and get Max. But would he do that now? It's a good question, isn't it? You know, I'm not sure he would. If he's got George being as good as he is and it's getting better and better with all the confidence he's got from winning the championship and everything else, is Max going to do a much better job than George in a great car in these regulations? Probably not. He probably wants Kimi to win the championship anyway in 27. There's more chance of Kimi beating George than Max, you could argue. So let's assume that's not on the table. Where else would he go then, Max? Ferrari, maybe. But if Ferrari continue the way they are, no way Lewis is going to want to stop. Maybe Charles would want to go to Red Bull just as a final opportunity to go, not final, but the first proper opportunity to go to a British team, run the British way, Red Bull on the way up. Charles Leclerc goes to Red Bull, Max goes to Ferrari with Lewis, maybe. That'd be quite fun, wouldn't it? McLaren, maybe Oscar goes somewhere and there's a chance at McLaren for Max. But would he think McLaren have got a better opportunity than Red Bull? Then he'd probably stay at Red Bull. I know it's not a clear-cut situation, is it? I don't think. I'd be very surprised if he's just got a Mercedes contract there ready for him to sign. Who's he replacing? Jason Jola yet again. Toto seems to prioritise Formula One show, seen in not challenging 21 and his engine stance in 26. Can't imagine past leaders, e.g. Horner, giving up small advantages. Your take on his approach? Yeah, I don't think it's more Toto. I think it's more Mercedes brand, not wanting to be seen to be rocking the boat as a sort of elder statesman of the blue chip car companies, wanting to be, put up a little bit of a struggle, but not wanting to be in the headlines for the wrong reasons. I think it's more Toto's understanding and appreciation of that, rather than what Toto would do if it was just Toto Wolff Racing. And I think he's right. You know, Mercedes have got this great heritage in the sport. You know, they've really got their knuckles wrapped in 55 with all the Le Mans disaster, when, you know, the car somersaulted and struck the crowd, 80 odd people killed. You know, Mercedes quickly withdrew from the sport. They were so embarrassed by it and shocked. And so I think you always have to bear that in mind. Mercedes have this history, and you need to be very careful of how that, you know, the logo is shown in Formula One. So they won the constructors in 21. That would have been almost enough for them if they'd, you know, Toto had explained that to them in a way they understood. And I think they wouldn't have wanted to have gone to the Treaty of Rome to defend Lewis's thing in 21. I would have, but I think Mercedes would not have wanted to have done that. And probably the same with this whole engine thing. They probably want to be seen to be working for the benefit of Formula One. And if that's what the FAA want, and we've been very clever, nonetheless, we will give in because we think it's for the good of the sport. In brackets, we have a very quick car too, so we don't really care. and so, just checking that. Where are we? Mercedes, I think Mercedes did win the constructors, didn't they? Where are we? Yeah. So it's it's not a surprise to me. I think it's Toto just doing a good job for Mercedes, the Mercedes image. And it's a shame. It's a shame that they didn't push for Lewis's thing, because I think if it had been reverse and Lewis had been driving for Red Bull and Red Bull had lost that championship that way, I think Christian Horner would have gone all the way for Lewis. Giant putt. 30-yard putt. Yeah. ICE manual gearbox, less driver aids and less regulation is the way to go. Well, yeah. You probably are very much a man after my own heart, giant putt. And yeah, manual gearbox, wouldn't that be nice? H-pattern gearboxes again, clutch pedals. I'd love to see that. Heel and towing. If you think about the foot cam shots of Grand Prix in '66 at the beginning there, mainly at the beginning around Monaco, and it's Phil Hill, it's a guy who knows how to drove a race car pretty well. A lot of the beauty of all that is the heel and towing, and seeing that half the foot on the brake, half on the throttle, and the blipping and the exact perfect revs, and that was such an art, nice thing. Each B4527. Hey Peter, hope you're well. Loved your Force India cap the other day. What did you think of Maurizio Arrivabene's time in Formula One? Yeah, grizzly old guy, wasn't he? He was a Philip Morris bloke, and he came in to run Ferrari. Didn't say much. Just classic Philip Morris exec, really. I've known quite a lot of them over the years. Some of them were sort of ex-rugby players and pretty cool, but a lot of them were just like Maurizio. And don't know, not much more to say. The only thing I would say is that I made this point before. He had the best signature. I think the best signature I've ever seen, Maurizio Arrivabene. Sort of looked a little bit like Mario Andretti's, with the big A, makes it quite easy, but really, really nice signature. Very impressive. Don't know how long he worked on that one. Review 07. Hi, Peter. I saw that people were discussing how Max struggles with long corners with constant radius. He burns through his front tyres. Any insights? Let me think. Well, let me take you back to Lewis's first Formula One race in Turkey through the 4 apex turn 7, whatever it was, the long left-hander, and he burnt through the tires then, and that was just because he was loading up the car so much. He had the car so square and sitting on the road so perfectly. He was developing more grip, and the tires just couldn't handle it. And I suspect on long line lock corners, Max sometimes has a similar problem. Because I've explained that using all of this amazing multitasking talent that he has of anticipation and manifesting itself in sometimes a shorter approach to a corner, which you can see on track, but not always is that the manifestation. The manifestation on a long corner where he can't really get into an apex earlier, and it's just like you're line locked on what you got to do there, and it's slightly banked. What Max nonetheless would still be able to do is he will find a way of getting the car absolutely perfectly square to the road, and as a result, he'll have more grip for any given moment, and he'll have more pace, therefore. But that will have an effect on tires that is nothing to do with tire management in the normal sense of the word. To take it to its ultimate extreme, when in '86, the one and only time I actually ran an operation, a race, a performance operation, I ran Nelson and Nigel in a series of demos in Japan. And we went to Toshigi, the Japanese test track, Honda test track with banking, and ran Nelson in the FW11 there on the banking. And within about 3 laps, he just destroyed the Goodyears, just completely destroyed the tires. And so we stopped the whole thing. And of course, it was the lateral load, the vertical load from which the tires were not built. And that is the thing. And what I was talking about with Lewis, it's a bit of vertical load coming in probably, and loading up the carcass in a way that the tire wasn't designed. And I think that happens with long corners with drivers like Lewis and Max and Charles, who are very, very good at getting the car absolutely square. And that's why Max probably is quite hard on tires through those corners, because he doesn't start a little bit wide and then wait a little bit and get the power on and load up the left rear and sort of do the normal thing. He get absolutely square and he's zong into the corner, and he uses up more energy through the tires and generates more heat. And he won't feel that, because he'll think, well, I'm just driving on the limit of the car. What do you want me to do? The tires are giving up. I can't. I'm not sideways. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. So it's an interesting point. So Shaq466, dear Peter, I wanted to know how you watch the races. Do you watch the TV broadcast? Do you get multiple onboards from TV, something else? I get multiple onboards, and I listen to quite a lot of the radio and the engine notes. That's how I watch it. I tend to start, I used to start quite early because you could see quite a lot of the grid, but I don't bother now because it's all those, people standing around. You don't get to see the cars. So I usually watch like 5 minutes to go, and then usually turn off just after the checkered flag, get on and do the videos. But yeah, no, I have a lot going on during the race, and it's quite difficult, obviously, keeping on top of it all. But we have 2 or 3 onboards, the main picture, the well feed, and then I'm switching from different audios at various points of the race, depending on who's doing what. So Jez James says, I think my preferred emergency ambulance driver would be Colin McRae over Gilles Villeneuve. I know I've seen Colin's crazy but very skilled driving up close on the RAC rally. Yeah, well, there are many. I suppose Walter Roll would be another great ambulance driver, wouldn't he? And so would Roger Clark. And, we could go on now forever. But if you take Formula One drivers, I think Gilles would probably get there before anybody else on the way. The ambulance might be a bit battered, might have a punctured tyre, might be a bit of smoke blowing out of the exhaust, but we'd still get there. Unlike Robbie Gordon, the IndyCar driver, who I got to know quite well years ago, 90, I don't know where it was, 90, late 90s. He was pretty quick, Robbie Gordon. And I mean, these guys, these kids, we were going down, I think it was the freeway from Indianapolis to Chicago or somewhere like that. And Robbie Gordon, he's not driving, of course. One mate of his is driving, and he just puts the auto transmission into reverse at 60, 70 miles an hour on the freeway. So, right. Digital artisan. Yeah, let the racers figure it out. I agree. The rules are the same for everybody. Yep. What we don't want, or maybe we do, maybe we want, as I say, all the drivers on the grid with computers, laptops, and they're all basically, gaming on the grid. But they're there in real life on the grid, so you can still get their autographs and watch over their shoulder, and all the Lewis fans can be with Lewis, and the Charles fans can be with Charles. They don't actually get in the race car at all, but, Extreme BHP. Good day, surely. Good day. Surely the people that make these rules should have known that this was going to be a problem. I don't see how they see this as the answer to racing. Something has to change. Well, not everybody would agree with you, Extreme BHP, and I don't think there will be a lot of change in the foreseeable future. So I think we just need to say, let's not talk about it too much, because we all get too stressed out about it. We might as well just enjoy the Kimmy George thing, the Charles Lewis thing, the Max thing, the Aston drama. That's it, I don't think, because if you go the other route, It's just, heart attack city, isn't it? Danny Jones, I don't like where we are, but it's done, and now the drivers are going to have to adapt. They're racers. They'll race. Yeah, well, they are, aren't they? As we said before, if it's lawnmowers, because the whole world has imploded, and it's just lawnmower racing from now on, you'd still have the Maxes and the Georges out there. Maybe not actually those people, but similar people. Happy Lewis is good. Lewis to see. Yep. Hi everybody from Max Flashart. Yeah. Max says, wheel eye time for management in Melbourne, I thought was a real issue. Yeah, being testing, right? I think you mean by that. Mike Stray, if you listen to the race radios, it seems the engineer drives the car more than the driver. They tell him to push this or that, go full throttle here, etc. there. Yeah, well, terrible, isn't it? Driver aids. You're not allowed to have driver aids, but you're allowed to have the engineer tell you what to do. Accelerate here, slower. But there were two nice moments, weren't there? One was when Charles didn't even hear his engineer when he told him he could pass Lewis, so he pressed this button and he didn't even do it. He forgot. And he wasn't too fussed about it anyway. And, well, didn't seem to be. And the other one was when JP got on the radio to Max saying, and I couldn't quite hear because the engine noise is now much greater on the Red Bull Powertrain Ford than it was. And it's quite difficult to hear Max sometimes. But he obviously said something like, Max, you're losing time to Gasly in and out of turn 6, which is the hairpin before the great turn 7. Because Max's response was, don't tell me how to drive, or something like that. Because then JP said, well, I'm only trying to give you information that hopefully will be helpful to you, Max. Sorry, something like that. Quite taken aback, I think. But I don't know, it's all a bit... I still think they missed a trick here, Formula One, because what they should have had is what P. Windsor suggested years ago, and I'm going to re-suggest now, and that is that the drivers should be able to talk to one another on the radio, not just to their team. They're allowed to have three moments in the race when they can talk to any other driver they choose. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Oh well, they missed that trick as well. Selwyn Curtis says the lift and coast era that Ferrari suffered neutralized Lewis's talents last year. Has his influence changed the Ferrari corner approach as they seem to make up time here now, extending the straight? I don't think, unless you know more than I'm not aware that Ferrari did more lift and coasting than most of the other teams last year. A and B, if anything, it's 10 times worse now. It's like lift and coast on steroids, isn't it? Because it's it's so obviously long and slow, much more than lift and coast ever was. So I don't think that was a reason that Lewis is suddenly closer to Charles. It's A, that the car is more forgiving to drive. B, some of the areas where you had to be absolutely pin sharp perfect, total confidence in the front, never mind the flick oversteer. Those moments have now gone. And C, if you've got a decent car and you're managing the energy well, it's not that difficult to pull up alongside your teammate and pass him with a power surge. Max says these regs have inverted the corners. Almost right there, I think. Not far away. We'll have a better picture of that at Suzuka. It's basically you're right. I mean, turn 7 was basically a straight in China. It was basically a straight. That's why there were 2 abreast through there. And some of the corners are now appearing on the straight where they're passing one another. It's all back to front. What's going on? Right. Jack Bauer, do you think Max is and will be putting as much effort into helping the team as he was doing, let's say, last year? I'm talking about everything, the level of commitment here, despite everything. 100%. But then don't imagine that Max Verstappen is Jack Brabham and he's there every day fettling over the car, arguing with Ron Toronek about whether to go to this roll stiffness or that roll stiffness. Max has never been that, never will be that. He's a racing driver and he's the best guy in the world, probably, to say this works, that doesn't. Because you know it on the lap time with Max. He doesn't even need to say it. You just put it on the car and it'll work or not. There's no, it feels a little bit better. I'm not sure about the understeer here. A bit of traction there. Maybe. Never have that with Max. Black and white like that. Quick or not. And he knows what he needs in order to be quick. So all of that will still be there from Max Verstappen. The trouble is 99% of the issues that Red Bull Powertrain Ford now have, what a mouthful that is, 99% of the issues they have are not things related to the stuff that Max can normally have input around, i.e. understeer, oversteer, poor traction, whatever. They're all related to power harvesting, energy, all this stuff, none of which he has any input with, and none of which means anything other than this is what he has to do when he's in the race car. So there we go. Danny Jones says, it will get better. Still early days. Yeah, of course it will. Everything will get better. Formula One's very good at working hard and making things better. Julian Thursday. It's quite a good point to end the entire live stream with, I think. This absolute classic. What do we think about the new papaya rules? In other words, if one car doesn't start, the other isn't allowed to start either. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Julian. Sorry I got to run, guys. I know there's a lot of you still that haven't had questions answered, but I've done my best, and we've had 2 good hours of fun and entertainment for me anyway, hopefully for you too, and discussion about where we are in the life, the world, the universe, and Formula One in general. So I'm just going to make sure I haven't... Debbie Maffio says, Jack Brabham. Yeah, good on you. I love Jack Brabham. I love watching him race, loved his way of life. And so many questions I haven't got to. I feel embarrassed, annoyed with myself, stupid. Cameron always gives me a hard time and I'm much too nice to everybody and I should limit everybody to 1 question only. But, you know, I've only got 2 hours to do this and I've got to run now. We've got to go up and watch the rally. So, you know, I can't be late for that. Absolutely no way. So everybody, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all and have this show. It's been a lot of fun. And what are we doing next week? We're going to do another big live stream next week. Already Mark Slade's agreed. It's Tuesday. I think we're going to do next Tuesday. And maybe somebody else as well. And I'm actually doing a chat with somebody that'll be quite fun next Wednesday, which I'll probably put out as a recorded video. I'm not going to give you, I'm not going to preempt fate by naming things before they actually happen, but this guy's I think you'll enjoy him. And yeah, lots more going forward. So thanks again, all the members who've signed up, really appreciate it. If you haven't done so, I'd love to have you on board. If not, don't worry, we're still going to be doing lots and lots of content for everybody, and that's very important. Big thanks to TrackNinja, to OBS Exclusive, to REC Watches, and to Jetcraft for their support of this channel, and of course to you folk as well. Thanks so much. See you soon.